It's not the sting of the leather that hurts the most, it's the words that come just before the strike. The whisper that cuts deeper than any whip. If your mother hadn't died, I would never have been burdened with you. The strap whistled through the cold air. Skin parted without a sound. The boy didn't cry out, not a single tear. He just pressed his lips together, a thin white line, as if he'd learned long ago that some pain is meant to be survived in silence. His name was Leo, and he was 5 years old. 5. And he already knew that some mothers don't love, and some houses are places where you learn not to breathe too loudly. That afternoon in the stables, as the old mare stomped a restless hoof against the packed earth, the shadow of a dog watched from the gate. It watched with dark, still eyes, eyes that had seen war and soon enough would enter the fray once more. The wind came down from the moors that morning, a dry and whistling sound that swept through the cattle pens of Blackwood Farm. The ground was hard and cracked, like the lips of the small boy dragging a water bucket towards the trough. Leo was only 5, but his steps were those of a much older man. He had learned to walk without making a sound, to breathe only when no one was looking. The bucket was nearly empty by the time he reached the water pump. A horse was watching him in silence. Willow, old and grey, her coat dappled with the marks of age, her eyes veiled by a soft, milky hatch. She never neighed, never kicked, just stood and watched. "It's all right," Leo whispered, rubbing her flank with an open palm. "If you don't tell, I won't either." A shout tore through the air like a bolt of lightning. "Late again, you little animal." Martha appeared in the stable doorway, a riding crop in her hand. She wore a clean linen dress, perfectly ironed, and had a flower pinned in her hair. From a distance, she looked like a respectable woman. Up close, she smelled of vinegar and barely contained rage. Leo dropped the bucket. The thirsty earth drank the water like a desperate mouth. "I told you, the horses eat before sunrise. Or did your mother not even teach you that before she made herself useless and died?" The boy didn't answer. He just bowed his head. The first blow landed on his back like a lash of ice. The second fell lower. Willow kicked the ground. "Look at me when I'm talking to you." But Leo only squeezed his eyes shut. "An ungrateful child. That's what you are. You should be sleeping in the barn with the other donkeys." From the farmhouse window, Clara watched. She was 7, with a pink bow in her hair and a new doll in her arms. Her mother adored her. She treated Leo as if he were a stain that soap couldn't wash away. That night, while the family gathered amidst prayers and the gentle clinking of cutlery, Leo lay awake in the hayloft. He didn't cry, he no longer knew how. Willow moved to the edge of her stall and rested her great head on the rotting wood that separated them. "You understand," he said without a voice. "You know what it's like when nobody wants to see you." The horse blinked slowly, as if in reply. A week later, a convoy of vehicles turned onto the dusty track leading to the farm. A government van, men in fluorescent vests, cameras hanging from their necks. And walking among them, without any hurry, was an old dog with a coat of grizzled grey and tired eyes that had seen more than any human could bear. His name was Jasper. Ellie, the woman who walked with him, was tall, with brown hair and a kind, steady voice. She wore tan leather boots and carried a clipboard full of papers. "Routine inspection," she said, smiling with a practiced gentleness. we received an anonymous report. Martha feigned surprise. She opened her arms as if offering up her home. We have nothing to hide here. You know how it is, people get bored in this town and like to make trouble. Jasper paid no attention to the horses or the goats. He walked straight towards the back of the barn, where Leo was sweeping amidst the manure. The boy froze. The dog froze. There was no barking, no fear, just a long pause in which two broken souls recognized one another. Jasper came closer. He sat in front of Leo. He didn't sniff him, didn't touch him, just sat there as if to say, I am here, and I see you. Martha watched them from a distance. Her eyes narrowed like a snake's in the sun. That boy, she said, then forced a laugh and turned to Ellie. He has a gift for the dramatic. Always making things up. I took him in out of pity. He's not my son. From my husband's past. More of a burden than a child. Ellie didn't respond, but Jasper did. He placed himself in front of Leo, his body a silent wall. Martha tensed. Can I help that dog? Jasper didn't move, just held her gaze. And Martha, for a single, fleeting moment, looked away. Because in that dog's gaze was something that could not be tamed or lied to. That night, the farm felt colder. Martha drank more wine than usual. Clara locked herself in her room with her dolls, drawing houses where no one ever shouted. And Leo dreamed for the first time in a long time. He dreamt of being held. He didn't know by whom. He only remembered the smell of damp earth and a warm muzzle against his cheek. Willow stamped her hoof on the ground. Once, twice, 3 times. The boy opened his eyes, and in the darkness, he thought he saw Jasper, lying just outside the barn, watching, waiting, as if he knew that the night could not last forever. The morning dawned with a low fog, the kind that tangles in the bare branches of trees, as if winter refuses to let go. At the entrance to the farm, a white van with the faded insignia of the County Animal Protection Unit stopped silently. Only the sparrows dared to sing. Ellie got out first, her boots caked with dried mud, a hand-knitted blue scarf wrapped around her neck, a scarf her grandmother had made for her more than 20 years ago. She wore it like a shield. She was followed by a large dog, his coat a mix of cinnamon and ash, his ears drooped, his walk weary but firm. It was Jasper. This is the place? Ellie asked the local officer who accompanied her. Yes. The Blackwood farm. They've been working with horses for generations. Jasper didn't wait for instructions. He scented the air, moved forward slowly to the old wooden gate, and stopped, staring inside. His breathing quickened. On the other side of the yard, a child no older than 5 was carrying a bucket of oats that looked twice as heavy as he was. He dragged his feet, he didn't weep, but his every step seemed to be an apology for being alive. Martha had just stepped out of the house in time to see the van. Her dress was perfectly pressed, her makeup flawless. Animal services, is it? Perfect, everything is under control here. Jasper let out a low growl. No one else heard it. Ellie walked forward, smiling politely. Good morning. We are here for a routine check. It will only take a few minutes. Of course, come in. We don't want any trouble. The place is clean, the horses are healthy. Then, raising her voice without looking at the child, Leo, put that down and don't you dare get our visitors dirty." The boy stopped. His neck showed an old mark, like dried leather. Jasper walked directly towards him. He didn't sniff the air, he didn't ask permission, he just stopped in front of Leo as if that small, thin body was the only thing that mattered. "Oh, him," Martha said with a cold little laugh. "That child is always playing the poor soul. He knows how to cry without shedding a tear. It's all theater." Ellie didn't reply. She just looked at the dog, and then at the boy. Leo didn't move, but his large, dark eyes shined with something that wasn't fear. It was something older, as if for centuries he had been waiting to be seen. Jasper tilted his head, brushed the boy's hand with his muzzle, and in that moment, Leo did something no one had ever seen him do before. He stretched out his fingers and touched the dog's fur. Just for a second, but it was enough. Ellie crouched down smoothly. "What's your name?" The boy didn't answer. Jasper sat beside him, as if to say, "You don't have to. I'll speak for you." "He's a bit shy," Martha muttered. "And quite clumsy, yes. But we feed him. He sleeps in the tool room. It's better than nothing, isn't it?" The sentence floated like a drop of oil in clean water. Ellie checked the stables, asked to see the horses, asked short questions. Everything seemed to be in order, too much in order. When they returned to the yard, Leo was gone. Jasper was sitting in front of the back door, motionless, as if he knew that behind that door lay secrets that didn't yet have a name. "Is that dog still in service?" Martha asked with a hint of disdain. "He looks ready for retirement." Ellie offered a small smile. "Dogs like him never retire. They just wait for their last mission." Before leaving, she stopped by a rose bush growing against the wall. There were thorns, yes, but there was also a small, timid flower, like a heart that refused to close completely. "And the girl Clara?" she asked casually. "She's different, has character, not like the other one." Ellie didn't look at Martha. She just murmured, "Sometimes, the ones who don't scream are the ones who remember the most." Jasper didn't bark, but as he climbed into the van, just before the door closed, he looked back one last time. Not towards the house, but towards the small window of the stable, where a pair of dark eyes were still watching. In that look, there was no plea, only an ancient, patient waiting, as if he knew someone had finally started to listen. And that was enough. In the small town of Oak Ridge, time walked with old feet. The cobblestones held stories that no one dared to speak aloud. The doors of the houses creaked as if their very hinges complained about what they heard at night. Everyone there knew something, but they talked about everything except that. Martha walked through the square in her well-fitted dresses and nails as red as dried blood. She greeted people with a practiced smile, as if she remembered the exact price of every feigned kindness. "How's the little one?" the baker would ask with a gentle voice. "Leo is as stubborn as a mule, but don't you worry, I know how to tame difficult creatures," Martha would reply with a laugh. A few feet away, Mr. Henderson watched from his bench under the sycamore tree. He had the look of a man who carried invisible debts. He owed Martha for a deal his brother had made. He also owed her his silence. Jasper, the old canine, slept during the day by the entrance of the Animal Protection Center. But at night, no one knew how or why, he would appear at the fence of Blackwood Farm. He didn't bark, he just watched, as if waiting for someone to open their mouth. One morning, it was Ellie who found him there. He was soaked with rain, his paws sunk in the mud, his eyes fixed on the stable window. Inside, Willow, the old mare, was striking the ground with her hoof in a steady rhythm, and behind the wooden wall, a small sob was contained, trembling like a leaf in winter. Ellie said nothing. She just crouched beside Jasper, placed a hand on his back and waited. The dog didn't move, but his body vibrated with an ancient tension, the kind felt by those who have seen too much. The next morning, a social worker arrived at the farm with her notepad and a hurried smile. She interviewed Leo for 15 minutes on the porch while Clara played with an expensive doll a few meters away. There are no visible signs of trauma. He's a quiet boy, but that's not unusual. He seems withdrawn. Is there a family history of autism? She asked without looking up. Martha let out a small laugh. The only thing that boy has is laziness and a need for attention. Without me, he'd be starving in some alley. The social worker signed her report and left before the sun had passed the church steeple. That afternoon, Jasper returned. This time, he lay down in front of the gate and refused to move. When Martha appeared with the riding crop in her hand, the dog let out a low growl. He didn't attack, he didn't retreat, he just growled with a gravity that came not from his teeth, but from his soul. You again, Martha spat as she approached. Jasper didn't flinch. His eyes were like two embers glowing in the mud. Inside the stable, Leo heard everything. He didn't look out, he didn't say a word, but he clutched the drawing he kept hidden under a bale of hay. It was him, his back covered in red marks, next to a dog with sad eyes. And behind them, a faceless woman shrouded in darkness. That night, Mr. Henderson received an anonymous note. A single sentence was written in clumsy strokes. What you keep silent hurts you, too. He stared at the paper for a long time, then burned it in the stove with trembling hands. One Saturday, while the town fair was being set up in the square, Leo walked by with a bucket of water. Clara followed behind him, eating cotton candy, singing without looking at her brother. Do you know what Mum told me? That you are not even ours, that you came with fleas. Leo didn't answer. He just walked faster. Clara laughed. Why don't you talk? Did a cat get your tongue like the donkey's? From across the field, Jasper's ears pricked up. He walked parallel to Leo from inside the fence, his footsteps like an echo. He didn't bark, but his shadow seemed to grow with every turn of the sun. That night, Willow stamped on her stable door again. 3 times. Then silence. Then again, like a code, like she knew. Jasper, from the gate, answered with a single, dry bark. Then he lay down, but his eyes did not close. Ellie knew it the next morning. She approached, placed a hand on the fence and said in a voice that was barely a whisper, What are you trying to teach me, old man? The next day, someone had left the farm gate open. No one knew how. By dawn, Jasper was inside, lying beside Leo, who had fallen asleep in the hay, covered only by an old sack. The dog had a paw on the boy's chest, as if to make sure he was still breathing. Martha found the scene and she exploded. Get out, you damned, flea-ridden dog. Get off my property. Leo woke up. He didn't cry, he didn't move, he just reached out a hand and placed it on Jasper's head, softly, as if giving him a blessing. "He's not going anywhere," he whispered for the first time. The words cut the air like a knife. Martha froze, not because of the voice, but because of the way he looked at her. There was no fear in those eyes, only a sorrow so old it no longer fit in a child's body. That day, something broke. Not in Martha. In the town. Because at noon, Mr. Henderson, the sad neighbor, went to the community center. He stood in front of Ellie and said, "I don't trust people, but I trust dogs. And that dog is telling the truth." And for the first time, someone was listening. Willow stamped on the stable door with her hoof. 1, 2, 3 times. It wasn't a loud sound. It was insistent, like someone knocking on the wooden knuckles of the past. It was late afternoon. The sky was turning a bruised blue, the kind that in small towns signals a coming cold. The fog was descending slowly from the hills, blurring the fences, the water troughs, the silence. Leo wasn't crying. He was just breathing, as if every breath was a splinter. The blow to the back of his head had dazed him. His lips were chapped, and a purple mark was spreading behind his ear. Clara, with her pink dress and lace ribbons, had accused him of breaking a broom. "Look what the little savage did. I told you he was always making things up, didn't I, Clara?" "Are you saying I'm lying, Martha?" That was all she needed. The whip fell without mercy, and when she was done, she muttered with a twisted smile, "If you don't learn with words, you learn with scars." Jasper had seen it all from the shadow of the cowshed. First, it was a whine, then a powerful leap against the gate. Then, like lightning without thunder, he ran to the fence, crossed the mud, and threw himself at the bench where Martha had laid the whip. With sure teeth, he tore it, bit it, shredded it. The pieces of leather flew like blackbirds. Martha stepped back. "That dog is mad." But Jasper wasn't looking at her. He was looking at Leo, with those ash-colored eyes that didn't ask questions, only understood. With that large, tired body that still knew what it was to protect. With a silence that was sometimes louder than any bark. And Leo looked up, and for the first time in a long, long time, his mouth opened. Just one word, just a breath. "Thanks." That night, Dr. Evans, the vet, came to the stables. Not for Leo. He came to check on a pregnant mare, but he saw the boy. He saw the marks. He saw how the old dog lay at the door like a guardian from another age. He didn't say anything. He didn't take any pictures. He didn't call anyone. He just stood there, looking. And in his gaze, there was more than suspicion. There was memory. Before he left, he knelt beside Willow, stroked her neck with an almost sacred slowness, and whispered, "Some of us were children without shields, too." Willow looked at him and stamped her hoof on the ground. Just once more. The next day, Clara was parading on the porch with her new doll. She was humming a tuneless song, as if the pain of others had no echo in her world. Leo was sweeping dry leaves near the chicken co-op. His neck was covered with an old handkerchief. He moved slowly, but his hands didn't tremble. Not since Jasper had been sleeping by his side. Suddenly, Willow stamped her gait again. Clara frowned. "That stupid horse again." Leo dropped the broom and walked to the stable. He rested his forehead against the animals. Neither said anything, but the air changed, as if something invisible was breathing beside them. "She knows," the boy said softly. She sees what you don't want to see. Martha was watching them from the kitchen. She swallowed but didn't look down. She approached slowly, surely, with sweet poison on her tongue. Look at you, talking to an animal. You should be grateful you have a roof over your head. Jasper rose. He didn't growl, he didn't bark. He just stood between her and the boy, a wall of silver fur and intact dignity. This dog doesn't understand his place, Martha spat. No. He understands mine, Leo said without looking at her. At dusk, Ellie returned with a notebook in her hand. She didn't come as an inspector, but as someone who couldn't sleep since she saw those eyes. Willow recognized her. Jasper wagged his tail, and Leo didn't run to hug her, just waited for her in silence, like someone who has learned not to expect too much. Ellie sat on a stone. She took out a pencil. Do you want to draw something, Leo? He shook his head. I don't draw anymore, he said without a smile. Ellie put the pencil away. What if I draw and you tell me if I'm doing it right? Leo hesitated. Then he nodded. She drew clumsy lines. A horse, a boy, a dog. Leo smiled. The hay? It doesn't look like hay. Can you show me how it really is? He took the pencil and in 10 minutes, a portrait from behind was born. A boy hugging a dog, looking towards a closed door. And on the door, a shadow of a woman with dark eyes and a broken whip at her feet. Ellie swallowed. Leo handed her back the pencil. Sometimes drawings are braver than I am. That night, Martha found the notebook in the hayloft. She read it, tore it up, burned it, but she didn't know that Jasper had watched her from the shadows, that Ellie had another copy, and that Leo's silence was no longer fear. It was a flame that had learned to wait. Before sleeping, Leo whispered to Willow, I hear you when no one talks to me. When I'm just an invisible boy. Willow snorted softly. Jasper lay down at the foot of the hay bed, and Leo leaned over. He stroked his white and rough ears. I don't know if they'll ever believe me, but you know. You always knew. And for the first time since he came into the world, Leo fell asleep without hiding his hands under his body, because he was no longer afraid that someone would find them. Because someone, even if it was just an old dog, had learned to see the marks that words don't leave. The day the earth spoke, it didn't do so with tremors or fire. It spoke through a rusty, dented box, buried under dry manure and the bitter smell of old wine. Ellie found it without looking for it. She was checking for signs of rodents behind the stable when Jasper began to scratch insistently at a corner of the hard-packed floor. He did it without barking, with that silent stubbornness that had grown over the years, like a grandfather who no longer argues but also never forgets. What is it, old man? Ellie whispered, crouching down. The box was the size of a notebook. When she opened it, a cloud of dust and memory stung her fingers. Inside were only 3 things, a folded sheet of children's drawings, a shirt button caked with dried blood, and a single black feather that still smelled of the farm. The drawings were clumsy, as if made by a small, trembling hand, but the message was clear. A child standing with a black eye, a dog in front of him with bared teeth, and behind them, the figure of a woman holding a whip. The woman's face was scribbled over with rage, the lines so hard they were almost carved in anger. In a corner, an attempt at a mother's face, but it was blurred, crossed out by water or by tears. Ellie folded the paper with the same care one would use to hold a relic. Jasper watched her, not wagging his tail, just waiting. At the Child Protection Center, the air smelled of chamomile tea and old books. Dr. Finch, the psychologist with a voice like a classical guitar, ran a finger over the drawings. "It's not fear this child is holding on to," he said in his low voice. "It's disappointment." "How do you know?" asked Ellie. Dr. Finch pointed to the bottom corner. "He drew a woman here. He wanted her. He needed her. But he crossed her out. He's not afraid of his mother. He's in pain because he doesn't have one." Ellie felt a lump in her throat and looked without seeing at Jasper, who was dozing on the rug by the window. "The dog is his guardian," replied Dr. Finch. "The only figure that doesn't change in all the drawings. It doesn't speak, it doesn't shout, it's just there. For a child like this, that is everything." That night at the farmhouse, Martha served dinner like someone throwing breadcrumbs to chickens. Clara ate with clean hands while Leo held his spoon with fingers smudged with dirt. "Where were you today?" she snapped without looking up. "Near the shepherd's field," Leo whispered. "And why is the drawer in the hayloft broken?" "It wasn't me." Martha turned. Her voice was as sweet as poison in hot tea. "You always have an excuse, don't you? No matter how small you are still a burden." Leo lowered his head. From the stable, Willow stamped her hoof against the door. "That damned animal again," Martha growled. "I'm going to sell her." "No," the boy murmured. "She's not doing anything." Martha leaned in so close Leo could smell her cheap perfume and resentment. "You don't do anything either. That's why you're so much like your mother." The slap was fast, almost silent. Outside, Jasper rose to his feet. No one had given him an order. A few days later, Ellie returned to the farm with a notebook. She sat beside Leo in the stable while he stroked Willow. "Leo," she said gently, "we found your box. The one you buried." The boy remained still. "Can I show it to you?" He nodded slowly. Ellie opened the lid, and Leo looked at his own drawings as if seeing them for the first time. "That's my mum," he said, almost inaudibly. Before she left, she promised she'd come back. Ellie didn't interrupt. "I thought if someone saw the drawing, they would go find her." "And why did you cross her out?" Leo looked at Willow, stroked her muzzle. "Because I understood she wasn't coming back. And that no one was coming. Except him," he said, pointing to Jasper. Later that afternoon, at the Foundation's office, Dr. Finch said a sentence that hung in the air. "When a child stops waiting, it's not because he has grown up. It's because something has broken." That night, Jasper sat outside Leo's door and didn't move until dawn. And finally, a week later, when Leo drew something new, Ellie knew a bridge had been built. It was a simple image. Leo standing, without bruises, Willow behind him, Jasper in front, and a sun timidly appearing over a field of thistles and poppies. Ellie smiled. She put the drawing in her bag, not as evidence, but as hope. And because at that moment, for the first time, Leo said softly, "Maybe I'm not so alone as I thought." And Jasper, though he was old, wagged his tail just once. But it was enough. The fog drifted down that morning, as if the earth refused to reveal all its secrets. From the stable, Leo saw the silhouette of the truck parked by the gate. Martha, the farm owner, was talking to a man in a wide hat and boots caked with dry mud. He held a clipboard in his hands. In his eyes, there was nothing. Jasper, lying in the shade of the barn, lifted his head instantly. He didn't bark, he just observed like an old guardian who senses a breaking point. "Who is that?" Leo asked in a small voice, stroking the rough neck of Willow, the old mare who listened to him without judgment. Clara appeared behind him with that twisted smile that never reached her eyes. "He's come to take Willow away," she whispered, as if sharing a delicious secret. "Mum says she's no good anymore. Just like you. Just like that dog." Leo's lips tightened. He felt a coldness creep up his back, not from the weather, but from the way Clara's voice landed on his chest. He ran towards the house. Martha was reviewing papers as always, a coffee cup in one hand, impatience in the other. "Don't take her. Willow listens to me. I take care of her." The blow came as it always did. Without warning, without guilt, without a soul. Martha's open palm sent him to the ground beside an empty feeder. "You don't decide anything here. Shut up, you animal." From the stable, Jasper slowly got up. His joints creaked like old wood. He growled low and deep. He didn't advance, he just waited. The man from the truck, who had been talking to Martha, looked down at Leo. Then he looked at Jasper, then at Martha. "Everything all right here?" Martha smiled. The bright, polished smile of someone who has learned to manipulate the world with the edges of her lips. "He's a complicated boy. Makes a drama out of everything. Pay him no mind." That night, the dinner table was set as always. Rice with tough pieces of meat, old bread, silence. Clara ate with relish. Martha didn't even glance at the boy. Martha was complaining about the truck arriving so early. Leo didn't touch his plate. Instead, he went down to the stable, huddled next to Willow, buried his face in her mane, and let the tears dry without witnesses. Jasper arrived shortly after, lay down beside him, and rested his muzzle on his leg. The warmth of the dog, his steady breath, his presence, said everything no one else did. At 6, the truck's engine rumbled as dawn was breaking. Jasper stood up. He didn't run, he walked step by step to the stable gate. He stopped, sniffed the rusty chain, and barked. The first one was low. The second was a harder, fuller bark, full of something ancient: memory, anger, loyalty. And then he threw himself against the wood. The impact was brutal. The chickens squawked. The horses kicked in their stalls. Willow let out a long, fearful scream. "What's gotten into that dog?" Martha yelled from the house, peering out with a spoon in her hand. Leo ran out. He had a stone in his palm, his eyes were red, his soul was full. "You're not taking her," he yelled at the man who was getting out of the truck. "She's my voice when no one listens. She sees me." Jasper stood in front of the truck, his legs apart, head low, back tense. He wasn't barking anymore. He didn't need to. The message had been delivered. The man lowered his arms, looked at Jasper, then at Leo. "I'm not doing this," he muttered. He turned around and got back in the truck. Martha appeared, furious, pushing open the porch door. What are you doing? You coward. I'm paying you for a job. The man didn't answer. He started the engine and drove away. The road dust rose like a falling curtain. Martha threw a newspaper against the wall. Clara ran to hide behind a curtain. In the stable, Willow snorted. Her breath came out warm in the cold air, as if she too had fought her own battle. Leo fell to his knees. He rested his forehead against Jasper's back, who had returned to lie down. Thank you, he whispered. The dog closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and exhaled. From the hill, Ellie had been watching. She didn't need binoculars to see what was happening. She knew, with the certainty of women whom life has taught to read what is not said. She picked up her phone. Today? Not tomorrow. We are getting him today. That child won't survive another night there. That night Martha ate alone. She didn't ask about Leo. Clara played with her new doll as if nothing had happened. And in the stable, someone had left a wool blanket without a word, and Leo slept between Willow and Jasper. He didn't dream, he didn't cry. He just breathed, as if for the first time, the silence didn't hurt. The evening descended like a misspoken prayer. The sky over the stony hills was a flat grey, no rain, no sun, as if time itself refused to take a side. In the kitchen of the rural shelter, the silence was thick. Ellie didn't move a muscle as she looked at Leo's notebook, where the child had once again drawn his own hunched body under the shadow of Martha, a woman with a whip. This time, he had added something new. The dog, Jasper, stood in front of her with his teeth bared. He doesn't leave me, Leo had said, his voice barely audible. He always knows when I am about to get hurt. Ellie felt something in her chest rearrange itself. It wasn't exactly pain. It was as if a distant memory, her own perhaps, was creaking open like the doors of those old farmhouses that groan before revealing a courtyard no one has set foot in for decades. But before she could answer, someone knocked on the door. The knocks were dry, rhythmic, as if the person outside feared nothing. It was Mr. Henderson, the solitary neighbor who talked to his chickens and watered his garden at 3 in the morning. No one took him seriously, but his eyes were clear, too clear for a man who had been so silent. He entered without waiting for an invitation, his hat in his hands and his gaze fixed on the tear-stained notebook. I don't trust people, he said bluntly, but I trust the look in that dog's eyes. Ellie frowned. What do you mean? Mr. Henderson placed his hat on the table. His fingers were thick, calloused from years of earth and tools, but they barely trembled. For 2 years, I've heard the same sound every Thursday night. The creak of leather, a contained cry, and a bark. Always in the same sequence. Leo flinched in his chair. Jasper, lying at his feet, lifted his head and let out a low whine. And why didn't you say anything before? Ellie asked, her calm voice barely concealing her anger. Because nobody listens to the madman, he answered. But now I see this drawing, and I see this animal, and I've had enough. Then, with a slowness that seemed to weigh on his very bones, he took a small old-fashioned digital recorder out of his pocket. He left it on the table. I turned it on once. I don't know why. I recorded that night without meaning to. You can't see anything, but you can hear. Ellie didn't touch it. She just nodded, and her voice was a firm whisper. Thank you for coming. As night fell, Martha stormed into the shelter wearing a wool coat and her lips painted as if it were Sunday. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. I've come for the boy. Jasper stood up. His legs were no longer as steady as they once were, but his posture was unshakable. He planted himself between Leo and the woman like a wall. Martha looked at him with disdain. This animal needs a leash, like everything that doesn't know its place. Leo, standing behind Jasper, said nothing, but his fingers found the dog's coarse fur and held on like someone clinging to an anchor in a shipwreck. Ellie crossed her arms. Leo is not going anywhere tonight. Martha laughed. And you think you can stop me? A public employee who can barely hold on to her job. The silence settled like a stone slab. Ellie didn't answer. It was Jasper who did. He let out a low, prolonged growl, full of an ancient sadness, as if he were crying out not just for Leo, but for all the children who had never had a Jasper. Martha took a step back. Damned animal, she muttered. You are going to die soon, you know. Useless old thing. Leo looked up. His eyes had that dull shine that only those who no longer expect miracles have. But his voice, though low, was clear. I'd rather die with him than live with you. The words were not anger, they were not drama. They were a decision, like those made at a window at dawn, when one has already cried all their tears. Martha froze, then turned and walked away. The slam of the door didn't feel like a threat, but a liberation. Ellie made the necessary call. Mr. Henderson's recording would be evaluated, but that would take time, and time was precisely what Leo didn't have. That morning, they packed a few things in a backpack, a notebook, a blanket, an apple, and a collar that Leo had made with a piece of rope and a small stone for Jasper. They left through the back door without drama, without noise. Mr. Henderson was waiting for them with an old Land Rover whose seats were covered with a Mexican blanket his grandmother had brought him to ward off bad luck. Jasper got in first, then Leo. Ellie took the wheel. No one said anything. Only when they crossed the bridge that marked the end of the town did Leo murmur, "Where are we going?" "To a place where the grass grows over wounds," Ellie replied. "They exist. We are going to find one." Jasper rested his head on Leo's lap. His eyes were closed, but his ears twitched attentively. And in that small, almost imperceptible gesture, the healing had already begun. The air at Havenwood Sanctuary smelled of old leather, soft hay, and reheated coffee. The hills embraced the equine therapy center like a grandmother embracing her sleeping grandchild. There, among hand-painted and crooked fences, pain had a different rhythm. It didn't scream, it didn't refuse. It just breathed slowly. Leo arrived with his shoulders slumped, his hands hidden in the pockets of an oversized, borrowed coat from the center. He walked like someone afraid the ground would shout at him for existing. Jasper, by his side, matched his pace, old, tired, but with his ears alert. Mrs. Gable, the woman who ran the place, asked no questions. She just looked at him once, like someone recognizing a note heard in a broken song. "You don't have to talk here if you don't want to," she said, handing him a carrot and pointing with her chin towards the stables. Leo didn't answer. He walked in silence. Jasper followed. Willow neighed as soon as she saw him. The old mare, with her somber but noble face, approached the boy as if she had been expecting him. Leo held out his hand, and the animal's warm muzzle brushed against his knuckles with a tenderness no one else had taught him. It was the first time anyone, animal or person, had touched him without violence in weeks. That night the boy, the dog, and the old mare slept together. The straw was hard, the cold was real, but Leo didn't wake up with a jolt like he used to. Jasper lay by his side, vigilant, as if within his ribs still lived the mission to protect. The days passed slowly. Mrs. Gable didn't demand anything. She just offered freshly baked bread, lemonade with good herbs, a hand-woven blanket with threads brought from a distant land. "A friend of my mother's on the farm gave it to me," she said one night. "When you take care of horses, you also have to learn to care for the wounds you can't see." Leo didn't answer. But that night, he started taking the blanket and covering Jasper with it. One afternoon, after helping to brush Willow, Leo stayed alone in the stable. No one saw him take a piece of paper and some worn-out pencils. He drew. Not people, not houses. Only scars, in the form of crooked lines, circles within circles, dead-end spirals. When Mrs. Gable found the drawing, she didn't touch it. She just looked at it and left a new red pencil on the table. The next day, Leo drew again. This time, it was an outstretched hand. It was impossible to know if it was going to strike or save. A week later, Dr. Finch, the quiet psychologist with a scruffy beard and a calm voice, arrived. He didn't ask about the drawings. He just sat on the other side of the stable and watched Leo feed Willow. "They say a horse reflects what a person feels inside," he commented, as if throwing a stone into a lake without expecting a splash. Leo looked up. What if inside there's only noise? Dr. Finch looked at him without surprise. "Then the horse gets restless. But if you wait and breathe with him, maybe the noise calms down." He didn't speak again that day, but at night, he told Jasper in a small voice, "Sometimes I think you were breathing for me when I couldn't." Jasper didn't bark. He just twitched an ear. It was a foggy morning when Leo approached Mrs. Gable with an old notebook in his hands. "Can I keep this here?" She took it without opening it. She placed it on a shelf next to the horse medicines. "Nothing gets lost here, son. Things are kept until one is ready." Leo looked down, but before leaving, he murmured, "Martha said that if I told, they would lock me up for lying." Mrs. Gable didn't raise her voice, she didn't clench her fists. She just came over and brushed a bit of dust from his shoulder. "And you are learning that's not true." Leo hesitated. "I'm starting to know." That night it rained. The storm shook the stable roof. Willow grew restless. Leo woke up with wide-open eyes. For a moment everything was back. The smell of leather, the shout, the dry crack of the whip. Jasper stood up first, approached the boy, and rested his head on his chest. He did nothing more, he didn't need to. Leo hugged him and said in a barely audible voice, "I was afraid no one would believe me. But you did." The next morning, Leo drew again. Not scars, not hands. He drew an open field full of tall grass, and in the middle, a boy walking alone but with a dog by his side. "Do you know what you've drawn?" Dr. Finch asked him. Leo thought about it. Then he nodded. "A place where it doesn't hurt." That afternoon, Ellie visited them. She brought papers, reports, news about the legal situation. We don't have a trial date yet, but Martha is being investigated. Leo didn't ask anything. He just stroked Willow. But later, while Ellie was talking to Mrs. Gable in the kitchen, Leo approached Jasper and said, "I don't want to go back. But if there's another child who is alone, I want them to know you can get up." Jasper looked at him with the cloudy eyes of a dog that has lived through too many wars and wagged his tail. As the sun set, Mrs. Gable lit a candle in front of an image of a serene woman she kept in the stable. It was a custom of hers, inherited from her grandmother, to light a candle for the living, not just the dead. Leo came closer. "Is it okay to pray if you don't know how?" Mrs. Gable smiled at him with the tenderness of fertile earth. "Of course, my love. Sometimes just breathing is a prayer." Leo closed his eyes. And for the first time, he didn't ask for someone to come and save him. He just asked to stay in the place where the grass grows over wounds, where horses don't run away, where an old dog listens without judgment. And that night, while the wind played with the curtains, Mrs. Gable saw him sleeping curled up with Jasper, and thought, "This child is not a survivor. He is a seed. And he's starting to grow." It was a warm afternoon in October. The sky had that golden tone that only appears when summer has given up. At the recovery center, the leaves fell as if they wanted to cover everything that had ever hurt. Leo was playing quietly with Willow. He had learned to brush her with a firm but gentle hand, to whisper words to her that were not commands, but trust. Jasper, as old as the mountains surrounding the center, was sleeping under the largest tree, one ear attentive, his soul awake. Then there was a short, sharp scream that tore the air. A little girl was running along the path that bordered the pond. Her feet slipped in the mud. Her body fell into the water. "Leah!" shouted Mrs. Gable, who was a few meters away. But Jasper was no longer asleep. His body reacted before his mind. He leaped, covering the distance between earth and water with the force of an ancient promise. And as the girl hit the surface, Jasper was already there, holding her by the scruff of her neck, swimming towards the shore as if his bones didn't ache, as if he were 5 years old and not 14. Leah coughed, she cried, but she was fine. The silence was filled with applause, with sighs, with tears. Leo said nothing. He just walked over to Jasper, looked at him for a long time, and touched his neck with both hands. "Thank you," he said, with the voice of someone who has learned what it means to be saved. 2 days later, the story was in all the local newspapers. Rescue dog saves girl from drowning. Jasper, the four-legged hero. A reporter named Chloe Vance arrived at the center with an old recorder and a leather notebook. She had something in her gaze, a mix of skepticism, courage, and a tenderness that did not go unnoticed. Mrs. Gable was not one for many words, but she agreed to talk. Chloe listened to everything, took notes, and instead of leaving, asked to stay for a few days. "I want to understand why this place smells of sorrow and miracles." No one answered her, but no one stopped her either. One night, while reviewing old files, she found something she didn't expect. A closed file. Miner's name, Leo Garmendia. Observation, insufficient evidence found to intervene. Signed by a social worker with the same last name as the inspector who had supervised Martha's farm. According to the testimony, She had spent only 15 minutes in the storeroom where Leo had lived. The next morning, she asked to speak to Leo. The boy watched her from a distance, hugging Jasper. He didn't seem to want to talk. "I don't want you to ask me what 1,000 people have already asked," he finally said. Chloe nodded. "Can I ask you something else, then? What does Jasper know that adults don't want to know?" Leo looked down. "He doesn't need proof. He believes me with his body." That same afternoon, Chloe published a longer article. She no longer spoke only of the rescue. She spoke of institutional silence, of legal abandonment, of a system that measures screams but doesn't see eyes. And she mentioned names. The social worker, the complacent town mayor, and Martha. The calls started arriving before nightfall. Mrs. Gable turned off the phone. Ellie, from headquarters, called for Khan. Mr. Henderson, the neighbor who had seen everything, left a note on the fence. "I told them that dog was barking at something." Within a few days, the social worker was temporarily suspended. The mayor, pressured by the town council, resigned for personal reasons. No one said much, but something had changed. The town's neighbors began to approach the center. Some with books, others with donations, many with ashamed eyes. "We didn't know. We didn't want to see." Mrs. Gable answered with just one sentence, "Silence also leaves marks." One November afternoon, while the wind played with the stable curtains, Chloe sat next to Leo, who was drawing on a wrinkled piece of paper. "What are you doing?" "Something I dreamed." He showed her the drawing. It was Jasper, standing in front of a house in ruins, and behind him, children with wings. "What does it mean?" Lilo thought. That dogs don't believe in justice, but they believe in showing up when no one else will. Chloe wrote it in her notebook, not as a journalist, but as someone who had just understood something essential, something that neither courts, nor politicians, nor laws could explain. That night, before falling asleep, Jasper got up with difficulty. He walked to Leo's door. He lay down there, as he always did. Leo, half asleep, murmured, "Don't leave me, okay?" Jasper didn't bark, but he took a deep breath and rested his head against the wood as if to say, "I am here, and I will be here." Mrs. Gable saw it all from the hallway. She stood there, motionless, feeling a strange peace, because she understood that true bonds don't make noise, they don't ask for permission. They just are. And when they break, they leave a footprint that, unerased, will bloom. The next morning, Leo went out to the field with Willow. Jasper walked more slowly by his side, but with his pride intact. And as the sun began to warm the earth, the boy said, "It's almost like a song. I'm not afraid to speak anymore, because you taught me that not all silences are mine." Jasper wagged his tail, and in that gesture, an old wound closed. Because in the end the strong don't shout. The strong protect, listen, and stay, even when no one else is left. The courtroom in Northwood smelled of old wood and winter. The high walls of rough stone didn't let in a single sound from the outside world. All that could be heard was the tick-tock of the judge's clock, the rustle of file papers, and the occasional suppressed sigh that seemed to carry decades of history. Martha entered, wearing her usual tight black coat, not a single wrinkle, and with her chin held high, like someone arriving to claim an inheritance, not to face the truth. She walked with a firm step, but her eyes didn't rest on anyone. Behind her was Clara. The girl, no longer a child, wore a pale blue dress she didn't like and a fear she didn't know how to name. Leo sat between Mrs. Gable and Ellie. He didn't speak, he didn't move. He just held in his hands the grey scarf that Jasper had given him that day. The dog lay under the bench, his gaze fixed on Martha, as if he knew that this was the place where something could finally break for good. Judge Ortega, with his thin hands and a firm voice, reviewed the file with a slowness that wasn't indifference, but respect for the unspoken. Finally he said, "Let us proceed. Martha Blackwood, you are accused of physical and psychological abuse against your stepson, Leo Garmendia." "Abuse?" Martha responded with a twisted smile. "Your Honor, that child was always a problem. He invented things, he hid like an animal, and then cried for attention. He never understood the word discipline." Jasper slowly rose as if a fire was burning on his back. Leo lowered his head but didn't cry. The judge observed without interrupting. Then he asked for the evidence. Ellie placed a sealed envelope on the table. Inside were the drawings. No medical reports, no photos, just one drawing after another. A wounded horse, a child hunched in a corner, a hand raised with a belt, and always the dog beside the boy, silent but solid. Clara watched them from the witness stand. She swallowed hard. Her mother didn't look at her, just crossed her arms as if at a boring dinner party. "Clara," the judge asked, "do you have anything to say?" The girl looked at her mother, then at Leo, then at the floor, and finally, she looked up as if she had suddenly grown wings. "At first, I thought Leo was exaggerating. Mum told me so. But once she hit me too, just once, because I broke a glass, and it felt like I was splitting apart inside." Martha's lips tightened. "It was an accident. A small correction. All mothers do it." "Not all of them, Mrs. Blackwood," the judge replied without raising his voice. "Mothers who love do not need to be right based on fear." The silence felt like an old prayer. From a corner of the room, Mr. Henderson stood up. He wore a worn-out cap and held an old notebook in his hands. "I have no studies," he said, "but I have ears. And for 2 years, every Thursday night, I heard the sound of leather hitting flesh and a small cry like a wounded dog. And you did nothing." Martha shouted. "I did nothing because I was a coward." Mr. Henderson did not flinch, "but today I came to say what I should have said a long time ago." The judge nodded, taking a note. The prosecutor asked no more questions. At that moment, Jasper stood up and walked slowly to the center of the room. He didn't bark, he didn't perform. He just sat in front of Martha and looked at her, silently, as if asking her, "Can you sleep at night?" And then something happened that no one expected. Leo stood up. His feet barely touched the ground, but his voice, though small, was clear. "She never saw me. She just yelled at me as if I were a shadow in her way. But Jasper saw me. And Willow. And I learned that if an animal can defend me, I can defend myself too." Martha turned with her mouth open as if looking for a reply, but found no words. The judge closed the file. He took a breath and said, "This court does not judge with laws alone. It judges with memory. And a child's memory is not erased by excuses." He delivered the sentence. 3 years of a suspended sentence, permanent loss of custody, and mandatory supervised therapy. Martha didn't cry. Clara did, but not from fear, from relief. Leo got off the stand, walked towards Jasper, hugged him, and said, almost in a secret, "It's over now. I don't have to hide anymore." Jasper rested his head on the boy's chest, and for the first time since they had entered that room, peace settled between them. Mrs. Gable handed Leo a tissue. Ellie put a hand on his shoulder. And the judge, before leaving, stopped and said to Jasper in a low voice, "Good dog. Very good dog." Outside the courthouse, the afternoon was opening up like a slow flower. The first rays of sun caressed the streets, and somewhere, far from files and sentences, a child believed again that his voice, however small, deserved to be heard. The field was covered in dew. A real dew, not the old horse with tired eyes, but that peaceful moisture that covers the earth before the sun has the courage to show itself completely. Leo walked barefoot through the plowed furrows of the meadow, his trousers rolled up and his hands in the pockets of a coat that was too big for him. Jasper followed him, without a leash, without hurry, without noise. They stopped together at the stable fence, where the wind always blew a little stronger, as if it wanted to carry away memories that no one wanted to name. Leo raised his gaze to the hill. Willow was grazing calmly, alone but not sad. The mare no longer seemed to belong to the past, but to a kind of present where nothing hurt. "You know, Jasper," the boy whispered. "No one here calls me useless. No one tells me I'm a burden." The dog tilted his head as if he understood every syllable. "Here they let me be silent. But not the silence from before, the one that weighed like a wet blanket on my shoulders. This one is different. It's the silence of the field at dawn, of freshly baked bread, of a hug that makes no sound." Mrs. Gable watched from the window with a cup of coffee in her hands. It was a simple house, made of rough stone, with thick walls and framed photos of people who were no longer there, her husband, her son, a mother who prayed before the vigil of the dead every night. She didn't talk much, but when she did, her words were like seeds. They remained, grew, and flourished when one least expected it. "That child has a tenderness that cannot be bought," she murmured. Jasper, now an official part of the house, was sleeping under the table, snoring softly. He didn't chase squirrels, he didn't bark at visitors. He just existed, like a lighthouse, a presence that said without speaking, "Here, you are safe." The day the letter from the judge arrived, Mrs. Gable opened it with steady hands. The law finally recognized what was obvious, that Leo had the right to a home without fear, that no one, not even Martha, could ever claim him again. The ink was dry, but the words had weight. The woman read it twice. Then she went to the stable and handed the paper to Leo. "This says you can stay here forever now, if you want." Leo didn't answer right away. He just stroked Willow behind her ear, where she always had an itch. "Can I keep sleeping in the same room as Jasper?" Mrs. Gable nodded. "Only if Jasper says yes." Leo smiled. Not like the children in commercials, but as if for the first time, he felt his presence wasn't a burden. "Thank you for not asking me to be different." Mrs. Gable said nothing. She just ran a hand through his hair with a gentleness that came from a very, very long time ago. A week later, Clara, Martha's daughter, was transferred to a specialized center. No one forced her to speak. They just showed her Leo's drawings, and something inside her broke. Not with rage, with truth. Mum didn't love any of us, she had said before falling asleep, clinging to a borrowed teddy bear. That afternoon, while Jasper lay in the sun like a warm, living stone, Leo approached him. He held a new drawing in his hands, not of blows or screams. It was a drawing of a boy walking through a field with a dog. Both were looking towards a horizon full of flowers. He knelt beside Jasper and placed the drawing between his paws. I don't have a mother like the others. But I have you. And you are enough. Jasper didn't wag his tail, there were no effusive gestures, but he lifted his head slightly, and the slow blink of his eyes was enough. Leo rested against his back, and for a moment everything was right. From the kitchen, Mrs. Gable watched him. She didn't cry, but she pressed a hand to her chest, where the pain of absence sometimes lived. That day it didn't hurt. It just beat differently. She lit a candle next to her son's portrait. Thank you for bringing me the child just when I had stopped waiting, she whispered. And if you, dear viewer, have made it this far, if you have ever felt that there is no more room for new tenderness, if you think that children like Leo are lost causes or that old dogs like Jasper have no more battles to fight, let me tell you this. Love doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't need papers, or shared genes, or perfect stories. It just needs space, time, and a second look. At Mrs. Gable's house, there is now a wooden chair on the side of the patio. Leo sits there every afternoon, with Jasper sleeping at his feet and Willow grazing nearby. Sometimes he draws, sometimes he just watches the clouds. One afternoon he told Mrs. Gable, when I grow up, I want to have a home for old dogs, so that no one has to die feeling alone. She didn't answer. She just poured him some more juice and put an arm around his shoulders. And Jasper, whose muzzle was now completely white, watched them in silence. There was no need to bark. Everything had already been said. The room smelled of cinnamon, damp wood, and memories from another time. In a corner, Beatrice, 74 years old, covered her shoulders with a hand-embroidered shawl inherited from her mother. The newspaper was open on her lap. On the front page, a photo and a headline, behind the silence, the story of Leo and Jasper. Beatrice didn't cry, but her mouth trembled almost imperceptibly, like someone holding back a confession for too long. That child, I knew him. Not him, but one just like him, she murmured, stroking the corner of the paper with fingers that knew of regret. She closed her eyes and saw another house, another table, another girl. Pale, with her hair in tight braids, with dark circles of fear under her eyes and a broken voice. She was the daughter of my husband's first marriage. Silent, fragile. I had my own son. I gave him more, I shouted at him more. I barely saw her. She touched the collar of her shawl as if the touch itself hurt. No one forced me, but I chose not to see her. Because seeing her reminded me of what I, too, had once been. She took out a piece of paper and wrote with a trembling hand, to the girl you still carry inside you, who was hurt, I ask for your forgiveness. I didn't know how to love. I didn't know how to listen. Then she approached the window. Outside, a girl was walking an old, white dog. The animal walked slowly, but its eyes still knew how to see. Beatrice smiled for the first time in weeks and whispered, almost inaudibly, thank you, Jasper, for barking where I remained silent. I wish someone like you had been there. And then, finally, she sat down to write her own story. Not to justify herself, but to heal. So that another woman, one day, might read it and dare to speak too. If this story has moved you, if you believe that every soul, human or animal, deserves to be seen and heard, please share it. In the comments below, tell us about a silent hero in your life, someone who, like Jasper, spoke volumes without saying a word. Your stories matter. They are a part of this great, ongoing conversation about love, resilience, and the courage to heal. And if you want to be a part of our community, a community that believes in the power of these stories, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Because every story shared is a light in the dark, a promise that no one has to be silent forever. Thank you for watching.